Okay, welcome back to the afternoon part of Rubicon, which is always a time where we are overwhelmed with information in a great way. But now we're going to wreck your head even further because we have three phenomenal women sitting on our panel to discuss identity, inclusion, and intersectionality. Welcome to the three of you. I'm not even going to introduce them because they can introduce themselves. So I'm going to start with you, Evaleen. Evaleen, tell us a little bit about you personally, just your background, where you grew up, and what you did maybe when you left school.
Yeah, so I'm Evaleen Whelton. I am from Cork, in case you can't guess from my accent. I suppose I finished school. I went to college 2 or 3 times before I actually finished. But I did commerce in UCC, and I also did speech and drama all my life.
So the stage is very, very comfortable for you?
Yeah, well, I'm being myself now, so I don't have a script. But yeah, I'm comfortable enough here, and I suppose that's what I worked in for a long time now. It's been drama as well. I think it's just
and
really
you're married
important.
and you're a mother.
I have a lovely girl, Maddie, who's 6, and a husband, Colm, as well. So
lovely.
Yeah, they're at home, I'm sure. Hoping
Holding
this
down
goes
the
okay
fort.
for me, yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, and what about you, Kate?
I am British. I consider myself a white, privileged, heterosexual mother, a currently stay-at-home mother, which was never what I was expecting to do. I'm a humanitarian aid worker by profession, and I was born in Burundi in East Africa, and then moved to England and didn't like that. So as soon as I could, moved elsewhere. Including Afghanistan and Sudan and Palestine, and have been grounded by having children.
Grounded.
And learning how to handle that, and always wanted to study theology, and started doing that as I started having children, so I have brought a different one to class with me every time. And my middle child has a severe neurological impairment from a brain injury before birth.
Okay.
So a lot of my thinking has been wrestling with that, really.
Okay, and how long have you lived then? And what brought you to Ireland? And how long have you lived here?
I married an Irishman
You poor old thing.
from Greystones, and I've lived here nearly exactly 6 years. So my daughter is 4 today, and my eldest is turning 6 at the end of the month, and we came here when he was a month old.
Great.
So 6 years.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Jenn Clark?
Yeah, my name is Jenn Clark. I'm originally from the US, America, but I've lived in Ireland for 20 years, so most of my adult life. I'm part of a faith community called Youth with a Mission. We run a residential retreat centre on the Irish border called Untitled, and we have 3 little boys as well. My eldest is 13 and he's taller than me and his feet are big, and there was a girl phoning him this weekend. I wasn't prepared for that, so... So all the things that come with life as a mum. I've really enjoyed living and working in faith communities. We do a lot with reconciliation and peace building within a Catholic and Protestant context, but also we enjoy running residential programs where we sponsor trainees from areas of conflict. So we regularly have people from Africa and the Middle East in our little village in Rostrevor. So they joke that when they see someone that looks a bit different, they send them our way, because usually they know they belong to us. So it's lovely to be here.
And we're going to dig deeper into each of your experiences in a little bit, but I think just to frame the conversation, it would be helpful if you could answer the question about how you self-identify. So what you feel your identity is.
Well, I think I have many identities, but one I discover, a very important part of me is my autistic identity. And I suppose sometimes when you say autism, people probably picture a 4-year-old boy. I'm not a 4-year-old boy. So I was 37 when I was diagnosed with Asperger's or autism, they're the same thing. So that has, I suppose, given me a huge understanding of who I am, why I do things, how I think, how I communicate, and I suppose it explained my whole life to me, and maybe how, so it's obviously, and I say I'm autistic, I don't say I'm with autism, because it is part of my identity. I'm not a normal person with autism. you know, because I think if you say that, it kind of sounds like, well, you could take the autism away from me and I would be normal. I'd hate to be normal. I don't think there is any normal. But the autistic community, a lot of us are campaigning for our human rights, I suppose, to be identified as a minority group. I suppose a lot of people see autism as a medical thing. But I think that is because it's completely misunderstood. Because non-autistic people have been looking at autistic people for over 100 years now and kind of making up stuff about us, basically. And there's a lot of misinformation about us there. So it's very important, you know, that when I say I'm autistic, what I mean is I think differently to non-autistic people. I communicate differently. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with my communication, and actually the recent research done in Edinburgh University now is that autistic people, we have actually a specific social communication. We have a way of communicating with other autistic people. And that's, I suppose, autistic people have been saying that for a long time now, 30 or 40 years. But now we have some evidence to back it up. Yeah. And communication is a two-way thing. So when non-autistic people communicate with autistic people, there's a miscommunication happening, and I suppose it's just breaking down our differences and so we can translate, basically. So we communicate differently, I think probably differently, and I also am quite sensitive to my environment.
And can I ask why or how it took until the age of 37 before you realised that you had autism?
Yeah, well, I suppose it wasn't even kind of, people didn't know about it when I was in school. I suppose Asperger's was only a term when I was doing my leaving cert. I'm a woman, so as usual, we were completely overlooked. Still are. Lots of women are actually misdiagnosed with borderline personality disorders, lots of other things, OCD, all of these kind of things, which aren't very helpful when they're actually autistic. So for me, I think I worked with kids for so long. I was teaching drama. I had obviously lots of autistic kids in my classes. Always kind of drawn to them. I suppose you recognise your own. And I just, around the time when I was pregnant, I suppose a lot of stuff that had happened in my life, I think happens to a lot of pregnant women anyway. A lot of unresolved stuff comes back. So I didn't realise at the time, but what I was doing and what I had been doing for a long time was masking. So that's pretending to be somebody else, basically, because I wasn't accepted as who I was from a very young age, and by society, I suppose. And trying to keep that mask on while I was pregnant wasn't very easy. And then, when my baby came along, I had to be the perfect mom, because obviously if I'm going to play a part, it's going to be the perfect part. And I just put immense pressure on myself. So about when my little girl was 1, I started researching stuff online, I suppose, just piecing things together. And when I came across women on the spectrum, I was like, oh, that's me.
And how did that then impact you in terms of your sense of, did it bring a sense of liberation or,
relief. I think relief, first of all, because it explained so much. I embraced it straight away. I was, I didn't see it as a negative thing. Now, it took me a while to say I was autistic publicly, because there's such a stigma around it. I'm sure if I was diagnosed with dyslexia or something at the age of 37, I'd have told everybody. But, autism is a dirty word, and I suppose that's part of the work that I do, to try and remove the stigma that's around it. And I mean, it opened up a whole new world to me as well. I met a lot of other autistic people. Like there's a women's group in Cork, so, there's lots of women who are diagnosed in adulthood as well. There's a huge autistic community online, and in Ireland now we're starting to kind of, I suppose, have more autistic. We had a first Autistic Pride event in Galway this summer.
Autistic Pride event, love it.
Yeah,
that's brilliant.
Yeah, well, I think everybody should be proud of their identity. I don't think it's anything we need to hide, but we definitely need to be ourselves more in society.
Brilliant. And we'll get to hear a little bit more about what you established as a result. But I'll just move on, Kate, and ask you the same question. How would you self-identify?
I would self-identify as a white, privileged female, heterosexual, married and mother. I would also consider myself temporarily able-bodied or not yet disabled. And an advocate of people who are in positions of marginalization, an advocate for the intellectually disabled, and an advocate for LGBTQI people.
Okay, and I know you worked with Oxfam and TEAR and TEAR Fund, and you have worked in many different places across the world, some very challenging places. Did your sense of self-identity, was it different within those contexts than it is now?
Yeah, I suppose I'm the sister of a brother who was disabled by an accident. So the reflection of being able-bodied was something I encountered early. The reflection of being white was something I encountered early because I was in the minority in East Africa as a white child in Burundi, and I didn't want to be white. I definitely, interestingly, learned a lot about my femininity from Afghanistan, where the poles of femininity and masculinity are so strongly diverse and separated. And it's a growing path. I mean, for me, it's a growing journey to be able to understand what the labels I have on me are is really interesting and helpful, because they're not always labels that I choose, but they are But the sort of the comparison is that other people have the opposite labels, and those matter. And so I think it's really important for me to say some of those labels out loud, and live in the impact that those labels have on my life, and by comparison, the impact they have on other people's lives.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Jenny?
I think I would self-identify also probably, I would say, as your basic white girl, in the sense that I'm white, privileged, cis, hetero, those kind of things. But I think if I labeled myself, it would be artist survivor. I think I grew up with a traumatic and tumultuous childhood with an alcoholic parent. And I think through art and creative expression, those have afforded me a space that has brought great healing. And I really believe strongly in the power of creativity. However that comes out, it doesn't mean you have to be a fantastic poet or a great musician, but the creative process and unlocking, and people's healing, I think, is really big for me.
And is part of your current work then in that area of arts and creativity?
Yes, I do. We're not making very much money at it, but sure, that's all right. Probably nobody in this room is, I don't know. But I think the power of storytelling, of helps and reminding people who they are, being returned to themselves in a way, and finding a place and a space to share. And the creative process itself, I think, is just so beautifully healing. And it's just been my personal experience, and one I've been very privileged to witness in a lot of people within our community and our neighborhoods. Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about the community. You had mentioned Ross Trevor earlier, and on Cune.
Yeah, so we live in a beautiful place, picturesque village, Rostrevor. If you've ever heard C.S. Lewis describe Narnia, that's where he used to holiday there as a child. So we literally live in Narnia. It's not terrible. Very different to where I grew up in inner city Baltimore. But we have a beautiful residential retreat center that we're blessed with, and we share it with a lot of people. We have regular staff, and every year we run a residential sort of reconciliation and peace-building faith-based program that's very culturally diverse. At any time within the building, we'll find people from, like as I mentioned, Africa, the Middle East, Lebanon, Rwanda, Burundi. And I've been to Burundi. I'd love to hear. I love it. It's best. But yeah, definitely not a lot of white people there. Being able to introduce these guys to the art maybe of telling their own story, or introducing them to a different way of reading the Bible, is very exciting. I just spoke yesterday to our trainees on the parent heart of God, specifically the mother heart of God, and going through all the sort of Old and New Testament, sort of looking at all these metaphors that God chooses to describe himself to us in that sort of female form, and it's wonderful to see their little minds blown. It really is great,
Yeah. And you mentioned the art of storytelling, or the importance of storytelling, and how then I imagine there's a lot of listening that takes place within such a diverse group of people that you work with, and how does that manifest itself?
How does it manifest itself? Very good. Well, some people are better listeners than others, and I'll tell you that white people are not at the top of the list of being great listeners. So for us, for me, it is a constant reminding our awareness of where we place ourselves within people's narratives. I think I love to introduce them to alternative biblical interpretations that we're just finding ourselves really blessed with. Do you know womanist biblical interpretation, LGBT, trans, all of those, and sort of as you begin to look at the Bible, the sacred, the first story, as you begin to look at that with new glasses, or an absence of the paradigm that we've grown up with, then people find they recognize themselves in those stories, and that's hugely empowering. It has been for me as a woman, definitely, to study the feminine, the divine feminine, that part of God, and then have that impact everyone else, and everything.
Great. So thank you. No, that's great. I think moving on now to having heard a little bit about how you self-identify as individuals, has your identity, made you feel included or excluded or both? And could you tell us maybe a little bit of your personal story around inclusion or exclusion, given your identity?
I suppose I mentioned masking a little bit there a minute ago, and for me, that's how I suppose that's the exclusion, or that's the reaction to being excluded. Masking isn't limited to the autistic community. A lot of minorities, people have to try to pass as normal. It's something that starts very young. Actually, listening to a researcher recently, and she was talking about how we react to babies. How that it actually starts at like a few months old. Like just to give an example, a baby smiles, and everybody, what does the baby do? When a baby smiles, what does everybody else do? They smile back. And then the baby learns that there's a kind of social connection, that there is a reason behind it, and they're getting that emotional feedback that they need as well. But if you're autistic, you might express your emotions quite differently. You might flap your hands. And if you see a child flapping their hands, what do? What do most people do? Well, they definitely don't flap back. They look like, oh, that's weird. Why are you doing that? Stop that. Don't embarrass me. So I suppose I'm talking about stimming. I don't know if people are familiar with that. If you look it up, it'll say self-regulatory. I'm totally gone off topic, sorry.
No, this is good, because this is something we
this
need
is
to
part
understand.
of being, why we're excluded, I suppose, but because we look weird, we do weird things, we say weird things. It's self-stimulating behaviour is what it's called, but it is so much more beyond that. It has at least 8 functions, which includes expressing emotions. It's part of our communication. As you can see, when I'm talking, I'm doing this, I'm doing a repetitive movement. It's actually helping me to get the words out of my body. If I wasn't actually, have any of you seen Nicholas Purcell's movie, I'm Nicholas? It's gone around the country. He was diagnosed as a kid. But his speech and language therapist at the time recommended that he sit on his hands. And he developed a stutter. But again, that was probably 20 years ago. Unfortunately, it's still happening. But it's part of our way of communicating. At an event last year, it's very hard to explain it because basically autistic people haven't had enough time around each other. We're literally only discovering, I suppose, our communication and our language, our own culture now. But at an event, I was on stage, and a friend of mine stims a lot, and she was like hands in the air doing this while I was on stage, and I understood exactly what she meant. Now, I can't translate it into words for you because we don't use words as autistic people. It's not our first language. Movement is much more part of our language, and I know that sounds quite strange. I think when you're doing weird things, when you're, people, that's the society, and we still do it to kids if they're fidgeting. We kind of have this thing where everyone has to sit still. If I asked you all to sit still now till the end of this panel, you'd all be like really uncomfortable. But again, you pick up on that, and because autistic people and non-autistic people are different, and there's nothing wrong with difference, but we are different, and there's less of us. Non-autistic people react to us in a different way, and we don't have the same body language. So you're looking, that chit chat people do, hi, how are you, whatever, you're just sussing each other out. We don't do that in the autistic community. It makes no sense to us. But you're sussing each other out to see who's more important, and all that stuff's going on. But obviously, we're not going to give you back the response that you're looking for. So we then are, I suppose, you don't know what to make of us. So therefore, there's something wrong with us. And I suppose then the reaction to that has been masking, and a lot of autistic people Rosaline mentioned earlier in the traveller community that the suicide rates are quite similar in the autistic community. Like the average life expectancy of an autistic person is 54 years of age, which has nothing to do with autism. Like autism isn't going to kill any of us. It's suicide is the main reason for autistic people to die. So again, this is, I think,
That's an horrific statistic, and one which I certainly didn't know. You obviously are very passionate about, I think, educating other people. And so out of that passion, you established an organisation called AUSome.
Yeah.
Which is very American.
Awesome. Well, it's AUsome as well.
So not so much.
But one of my autistic friends lived in America, so she says awesome all the time. So when I was thinking of a name, I wanted something positive. I wanted to incorporate the AU. So AUSome Cork it was, now it's AUSome Ireland. And I do think it's, look, there's a lot of ignorance there. There's a lot of misinformation out there. And I think that then creates fear. And the only way to combat that is to actually educate people and to change perceptions, and change the narrative around autism. And
what kinds of things do you do then with, like, you mentioned your conference that you held last year, and how amazing that was, if you want to share.
Yeah, so, as usual, there were some autism conferences on, and some of us online were like, oh, look who's talking at this one, and I was like, guys, we need to do our own one. And I love organising. So I organised the first ever all autistic conference in Ireland, in Cork, the Rebel County, last February. And we had like 330 people came. We had people from the UK, Germany, it was phenomenal, because obviously putting on an event, I was afraid we wouldn't sell enough tickets to make it happen. But we did, and the sense of community in the room that day, that's what people left, most people commented on afterwards. I had people coming up to me going, I wish I was autistic, because the sense of community was just, you could just feel it in the room. It was amazing. So yeah, I have 2 planned for next year. I don't know why I draw this on myself, but again, I think we need to get information out faster, because the kids in our community are really suffering. So I think having autistic voices at the centre of the conversation is really, really important. And having an all autistic conference means that only our voices are heard. We're not trying to speak over professionals or over anybody else. And a lot of autistic people have a lot of research done, in their special interest within autism, and they have a lot of information to share. So I do training as well. When I was diagnosed myself, my first impulse was like, how can I help kids, other people, other autistic people, learn all the stuff I learned the hard way in real life. And because my background was drama, I, devised a program that teaches, I don't like the word social skills, it's such a buzzword, but communication, basically. I call it non-autistic language. That's what I teach, and I teach it through drama, because they are, we all learn by doing. Well, better way to teach. So I do social skills. I teach, because communication is a two-way thing. Right. I teach, people to communicate change their communication when they're communicating with us. And then I teach autistic people how to, read other people, and because it's a two-way thing. Whereas up until now, the onus has been on autistic people, to fix their broken social skills and learn how to behave ourselves. So, and act like the normal people. So.
Very good, thank you. Okay, Kate, inclusion, exclusion.
I am horribly included. I come from a posh-sounding, English-speaking, British passport-holding, established church membership family with open access to education. And so, in that sense, my experience has been at the top end of the percent of opportunities and ease. And yet I've all my life known that wasn't everybody's experience. And so, and in fact, I'd say it's the majority of the world does not experience this ease. So I train my thinking and life experience to being in and amongst that and taking the position I can, which sometimes I struggle with, of being an advocate, where I can be a credible messenger, and I have open doors. I seek to try to facilitate other people and bring the message that doesn't get to other places more easily.
And which leads us on to the very interesting topic that you chose for your PhD.
And PhDs haven't just being thought about. It was just a master's thesis. I love that you thought it was a PhD. It's going to turn into a PhD.
We'll call you Dr. Kate. Okay, it is going to turn. Yeah. But why did you choose the topic?
I come from a Christian household. For me, faith is incredibly significant. I came from very open, loving, supportive parents for whom there were no limitations on me as being a girl child of theirs. I had thought about issues of racism, issues of ability and disability, issues of poverty and privilege before. But I suppose my experience in very religious countries, so in Afghanistan, in Israel, in Palestine, in Sudan, in Burundi, in Ireland, they're very religious countries, be it animism, Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. And I think that how a society interprets its holy scriptures has such a significant impact on outworking in life. And coming from the Christian faith, I feel that there are really significant problems with how faith is interpreted through a lens that has been white, male, heterosexual, and able-bodied. And if you are not one of those things, you are marginalized by that biblical interpretation. And so I wanted to bring the lens that was particularly close to my heart, having now being the mother of Alana, who has a severe neurological impairment. She's blind. She speaks in nursery rhymes a lot. And she doesn't walk or sit herself. And nobody has a plan for an expectation of what she will be like in life. To apply the lens of disability to reading the Bible and to see what comes. So my feminism helps me look at disability. I think my lens of disability helps me look at sexuality. And just trying to deconstruct the able-bodied foundation of looking at the Bible all the time. So what better to look at when you're thinking about body than the body of Christ metaphor, which is described in 1 Corinthians 12, and that the church is described as the church. And so it was about understanding that Jesus as a human being was in a vulnerable body, and it is not our ability that makes us connected as humans. It is our inherent vulnerability. And we are all subject to disablement and death, which is why I love the disabled theory term, I am a not yet disabled, or I am the temporarily able-bodied. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, in reflecting on Christ in that way, then a disabled theologian called Nancy Easland brought out a reflection that the scars of Jesus' crucifixion were still present on his resurrected body. And that there wasn't an elimination in this heavenly perfection, resurrected perfection. There was still the bodily evidence of the life lived. And that prompts really, I suppose, the idea of considering Jesus as a disabled person in the end, and vulnerable to disablement. And that the body that he represents, which I would say is the people of the church now, shouldn't be seen as an able body. And if you look at the text, as I had for 40 years, I had never noticed the language in that section in Corinthians 12 where it says the weaker parts are indispensable. And that just struck me of how to look into that. What is that telling me about how God sees weakness? I think we inappropriately sometimes in disabled theory put disability in with the weak, when actually I think it's about all of us. But I think the message is that God actually has a prioritizing desire to subvert what the world calls weak and inferior. And what is being talked about in that body metaphor is the worldly descriptions of what's weak and inferior and unvaluable. But I don't think there is disability in God. I don't think that whether you speak with your body, your ears, your eyes, your silence. Any limitation can come between you and God because of your bodily or mental or intellectual experience. All bodies are relational, and the body of Christ, the church, is relational. And any body, whether it moves or speaks or not, can still be dealt with love. And for me, that's where we imitate God. It is a God who is, in Christian theory, triune, and there is a constant relationship between the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. The mother, I wouldn't be stuck to the Father.
Heart of God, yeah.
And it is the in-between of the relationship where there is love that I think we actually imitate God. But our interpretation has always been about the body and perfection and rational ability and your ability to say yes to God. And I think that really needs to be questioned.
Okay, that's fascinating. Okay. Jen, Greg, just so you know, our counter has stopped at, it says I have 41 minutes left.
I thought that was just me. I thought, wow, this is, we've entered a space-time.
But I just want to make sure that we have plenty of time to just get the 10 more minutes. Okay, Jen, don't feel constrained by that 10 minutes. You just speak as you feel.
Okay.
So we're talking about the sense of inclusion or exclusion, and in your own work experience.
In my own work experience, which is my own life experience, I think I experienced great inclusion until I didn't, until my family of origin disintegrated, and I grew up in a rough neighborhood, but that has shaped me. I grew up with African American neighbors, Iranian neighbors, Mexican American neighbors, and all of their stories and their faces and the stories that they told me of the places they come from have put a spark in me that just has to now, I just can't sit with the status quo, I love working with my organization, but I suppose I've experienced exclusion in as much I'm a woman and I work with an evangelical Christian organization, and as much as they are male-dominated, it's male-dominated, and I've experienced, I think that's very real and very present. And I'm delighted that there are more conversations happening in and around what it's like to live outside of that, as Bell Hooks calls that, the white patriarchal colonialist, white supremacist power paradigm, So let's get out away from that. Let's continue to look at our holy scriptures. Let's hear our prophets. Where are our prophets? Where are they coming from? They're not coming from the top and the in the middle. They're not coming from the places of power. Jesus didn't come to collude with people of power. No, he went as far as you could go to the margins. He found those people and brought them in. So those are the voices that I feel I can't rest until I shut up and start listening. And enough of this voice for the voiceless crap, man. We don't need to, I'm so tired of that term. What we need to do is put down the mic and pass it. That's what we need to do. Right. People have a voice, we just don't have ears to hear, right? So, yeah, I think that's been, so I've experienced both, I think, and I continue to experience both. In one sense, my family background is very settled. I have a lovely husband and three children. I have three children.
Does she have 2 or 3?
Three of them, who continue to teach me every day, about the power of story. Even yesterday evening, my littlest boy, he's an Enneagram 8. I don't know if you guys know Enneagram, but he's just my little challenger. And everything he has to do himself. Well, he ended up trying to get a jug of milk and poured it, and of course spilled everywhere. And of course he descends into this, I can't do anything right, I'm useless. And so in that space, what I did was I told him about the first time I was waiting tables, and I spilt a glass of champagne all over this woman in a very fancy sequin dress, and so then my other son says, I tripped one time too in the canteen and dropped mine, and everybody laughed, and we were able to transform that space he would have invited a lot of shame and a lot of self-deprecation just by sharing our stories together. We were able to, and we had a big laugh around the dinner table about how clumsy person Mummy is, that she spills, and it was I was a terrible waitress, a lot of stories where I spilled things on people.
Oh, I can trump you with waitress stories, absolutely. But you talk about, so you work with many different nationalities in Rostrevor, and in terms of using arts and creativity to foster a sense of their inclusion in that community, how does that work?
I think, we're all still learning, but we live in a beautiful village where we're very blessed with having access to lots of talented musicians, songwriters, and storytellers. And what we've been able to do is partner with a couple of our, I don't know if Tommy Sands, who's a great Irish musician, a big Irish music family, invite him in, and he does a talk and some workshops with guys about storytelling and songwriting, and we actually get to run an event with him every year called the Music of Healing, which is, we invite people from as far different perspectives as you can get, political, lifestyle, all of that, very different, and they come together and we share stories and we sing songs, and sometimes we sit down and have some wine and those kind of things. So being able to try and create space, I suppose, with the place that we've been given seems to be all we need to do. The Spirit seems to be quite capable of leading us in the right way if we're able to just put down the mic, as I said before. So I think for us who have found ourselves in places of extreme privilege or power or close to proximity to power, need to be very mindful that it starts with listening. So I've been trying to, as best as I can, continue to listen. And we have such a great gift in the internet and social media and Twitter and all these places where we can find and we can listen to those voices out there. And my eldest son is neurologically atypical as well on the spectrum, and whatever. Yeah, he is. And boy, what he's taught me about slowing down and listening and the world, to see it from his perspective. So I think the more people we invite to the table, the more perspective that we get just will enrich and deepen us as the body of Christ and our own experience with our own faith traditions.
Okay, great. So I'm going to finish with a final question to each one of you, and they may be different, but for you, Evaleen, what does positive change for autistic people mean to you in Ireland?
Okay, I'll try and make it really fast, short.
No, don't worry.
I think it is about changing attitudes. I could give you a list of things, but I think acceptance and true acceptance. It's not just accepting that autistic people exist and letting us into society, to function in a way that you've defined as functioning. I think we need to create a space in society for autistic people to actually be autistic, to develop autistically. It doesn't exist right now. Everything that exists is designed for non-autistic people, neurotypical people. And anything that's been done around autism up till now is trying to still fit us into a society which isn't built for us as such. And I think the only way we can do, and that's for any minority, is to truly accept people as they are. And if that means, and changing our whole perception on what society is. I suppose just to give a quick example, I was training in a school last week, and they were talking about maybe autistic people who have another condition that prevents them from speaking, perhaps. So somebody who's non-speaking, and that they might not have interest in doing what we're doing. And I'm like, but we need to accept as humans that we're not the most important thing in the world. We've just decided we are. We just decided we're the most important thing. Mm-hmm. Some autistic people, and I'm sure some non-autistic people, don't see human beings as the most important thing in the world. They are, I would say, environmental communicators. They're communicating with their environment the whole time. And there is no space in the world for those people in particular, I think. And I think there needs to be just, again, listening to people, because particularly in the autistic community, a lot of people actually don't speak verbally, but everybody communicates and everybody has something to say. So I think, listening and accepting people as they are is really the main thing that we can do,
Brilliant, thanks so much. And Kate, your final question would be, how have you experienced church in Ireland to be a force of inclusion or exclusion?
It's interesting. I will say something potentially very controversial.
Oh, please do. We're used to that here.
I think abortion legislation here and the fact that there has not been the abortion of children who are diagnosed antenatally with various types of disability or conditions and syndromes means that there is a very big disabled population in Ireland. And I think Ireland has a very good relationship with its disabled population. I think because of the greater numbers, there is greater acceptance and just the presence, just representation. At best, church can be a place of welcome and respect and dignity. But I still think it's even the best churches, and I would put mine amongst that for the inclusion of people with intellectual disabilities in particular, is still a long way from seeing the spiritual equal contribution of people who think, speak, experience, communicate in non-standard ways, and receiving from them and learning the skills to discern what God is saying about God's self from people who don't look like us.
Great. Thank you so much, Kate. And finally, Jenn, for you, in 20 seconds or less. No, I'm joking.
I can do it.
I'll put the same question to you. How have you experienced church as a force of inclusion or exclusion?
Gosh, they're two sides of the same coin, aren't they? I think if you find yourself in a place where you, like I said before, are empower, enjoy close proximity to power, church is very easy, you know? If you're not in those positions, it's not. So I've seen, and I think working as a full-time Christian, as my second son likes to call us, a professional Christian. I think I will always seek to use whatever I have and whatever God's given me to widen the table, to extend, to open, to listen, to welcome. Because I think that's probably what the world needs. I think that's probably what the world needs. I think what church has amassed is a lot of resource and a lot of building, and I think our challenge can be now now how do we live? How do we give? How do we give back? So I think where church does have, if you're talking about the global church, you know, they have an opportunity to be a voice of welcome and be the hands of Jesus. And Jesus is the one who reached out and touched those who could not be touched. So I think that's what we're meant to be doing as a body of Christ. So I hope, everyone here in this room does that. And don't be lazy, I think also is the thing. Don't be lazy.
Don't be shaking your finger. Shake your
That's
finger.
right. Don't be lazy, guys. Find the people. Go and find the prophets. Like Twitter is a great place, you know. Go and listen to the voices. You know, ask around. Ask who's not being represented. Whose voices are missing from the narrative, and go and find them and listen to them. And we can start to begin to shape this church back into something we can all kind of want to keep going to.
Amen. All right. Thank you so much for the three of you to come and share your lived experiences of identity and all that we've learned from you today. Really appreciate it. Would you please put your hands together for our three panelists?